Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Breaking into Cybersecurity. Thank you all for joining us. This week we have Nathan Chung, hope I pronounced that right,
Yes.
on with us, and we'll be discussing the topic of neurodiversity and diversity within cybersecurity specifically. As a reminder to anyone that's following us, make sure you subscribe on LinkedIn, you follow us on YouTube, and you subscribe on your favorite podcast channel. Feel free to submit questions. If we see questions, we'll be able to tackle them along the way and help address anything that the community wants to hear from us. So first, Nathan, do you want to give us a little bit about a little background about yourself and what brought you to cybersecurity?
Sure, and absolutely, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here today. So right now, I'm a senior consultant at Microsoft, the new job I started back in March. I got into cybersecurity maybe 5 or 6 years ago. My very first job in cyber was working at Gymboree, a kids retailer which no longer exists, sadly. My first job, I started doing a lot of audit compliance, and it was a great learning experience for me, especially since when the manager quit about 2 months in, so I had to learn a lot on my own short period of time.
Mhm. Perfect. So how was audit for you? Like, was that something that initially interested you? Like, what brought you into the audit side of things?
It was a entry level position, and at the time I was working in IT, and I just wanted to get in cyber because it's a hot field and there's a lot of jobs. So I think that's why I gravitated towards cybersecurity at the time.
Okay. And how have your views changed in regards to your approach and your transition?
Well, like all IT and cyber jobs, it's a constant race. Like new technology are always popping up. Like now, the big name now is cloud. So I had to past year, so I made the transition from just security to now I'm now doing cloud security. So that is a constant challenge for every person in IT and cyber, just keeping up with the new technology.
Okay, okay. So I know one of the things that you're very, very passionate about is neurodiversity. Do you want to explain, set a baseline for everyone that's listening? What exactly is neurodiversity and how is it different from the other diversity that we always hear about?
Sure. Neurodiversity is not often talked about, sadly. I myself, I have ADHD and autism. So when people hear that, the the atypical natural thinking is I'm different and they start treating me differently. That is a disservice and does discriminate against people like me because it's been shown that many people who are neurodiverse are really good in cyber. Like, for example, in Israel, they have an entire military unit that's mostly full of people who are similar to me, who have been proving themselves to really excel at the basic cyber jobs, like looking at log analysis and looking at detecting threats. So that alone proves that neurodiverse individuals are really good at cyber. But also the caveat is cyber is not the only job that's good for people who are neurodiverse. There are just many jobs. It's like you gotta unlock your creativity and be able to explore what fits best for you at your given your life journey at the time.
And for you, what about cyber really resonated for you? Because you mentioned audit. I mean, for me, like just thinking about audit makes my skin crawl. Like I personally don't like audit. I love consulting. I love strategy. But the fact to think to go through line by line, log by log, or something like that, that totally doesn't interest me. What about audit interests you?
So that's a good point. So I did struggle with audit compliance.
Hmm.
In my first job, I was very successful after the magic quit. I was able to get the entire organization PCI DSS compliant, which was difficult, like doing it mostly by myself. So I had to partner with the other cyber and IT groups to make it happen.
Hmm.
But I echo your sentiment. It is a hard and very difficult job to do. Now, as a consultant, I do feel that consulting is a better fit, especially for me, because there's a definitive start and end to every project, so that like you're not working for infinity, so that gives me a little more peace.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when it comes to other individuals that might have like ADHD or autism, what are some of the skill sets that they might have that they would excel in, that organizations can take advantage of and use that as a tool in their arsenal versus looking at it as a disability?
So that's a really great question, Chris. One good skill that comes to mind is essentially finding a needle in a haystack, like for in a SOC roles, and just looking at rows upon rows of security data and log data. That is very tedious work, and that will bore a lot of people to death. But for people like me and some individuals, such as myself, they can actually enjoy it. They can stare at a computer all day and actually enjoy it and just be totally focused looking at log data all day. One example, when I was working at another retailer, I remember an exec was getting locked out of his iPhone, and a lot of people, they were just struggling looking at the logs to try to find what is causing this exec to get locked out.
Mm-hmm.
I was parsing through all that log data. I was able to find the root cause of that in roughly 1 hour. So that's a demonstration of neurodiversity being an advantage. Now, can you imagine if more companies do similar to what they do in Israel, just have specialized units working in a SOC, just looking at log data? That can translate to a competitive advantage for some companies to be able to detect that adversary. That is, be able to detect an adversary and attack is crucial to address cybersecurity risks and to lessen the damage an attacker might cause. Just be able to detect them.
Yeah, absolutely. And this study, or this airing of like 60 Minutes was maybe a year ago now, but I know there's other examples of that. For example, in Germany, there's an insurance company that has a whole division focused on the neurodiverse workforce and bringing them in, but finding, like you said, that right skill set for them.
Yes.
Not all of them were focused on analytics or pattern recognition. There were others focused on solving critical problems or looking at things from their approach. Because if you're colorblind, you'll never notice that these colors affect people. So how does that affect other things? So yeah, it's definitely a competitive advantage that companies can consider. Over the past couple of years, have you seen an increase in the United States of companies looking to increase their capacity of managing neurodiverse individuals and using that as a competitive advantage?
In fact, yes, there has been a few companies like Microsoft, where I'm working at, there's just a huge push to hire neurodiverse workers. Other companies as well, like there's SAP, EY, even Dell. So I do believe that companies are waking up and starting to see the benefits, but the approach to hire neurodiverse workers is still more or less broken at many companies, because the interview process alone is a huge barrier. Like when I go to interview, it's very stressful and can be a bit of a nightmare, not just for me, but other people. The interview process itself is essentially, it's like a social dance. It comes down to more, not necessarily the skill, bring the right skills to the table. It's more like, do you like me enough to be able to work with me? And for many people with neurodiverse conditions, it's really hard. It's usually they can either like blank out or just not have the right answer. And that to an interviewer is usually a red flag that this is a problem. We should not hire this person. So that alone, it's a huge wall that will just shut out a lot of people who are neurodiverse, like from the get-go.
And what are some of the strategies that you might recommend for just a quick improvement there in the hiring and recruiting and onboarding process?
Yep, great question. Sometimes just asking the person, what do they need? Ask for a combination of what they need. Like for me personally, I would ask for things like or interviewing remotely and also asking for the questions ahead of time. That just takes the edge off and anxieties goes away, and I'm free to be my best self in the interview. And that really helped.
Wow, that's very interesting. And I know getting hired is just the first part of the problem. When it comes to retention and operating at your maximal, what are some of the challenges that you've seen from hiring managers or managers in general that are managing individuals with neurodiversity? Like, I'm guessing it's not the same like managing everyone else. That's an assumption on my part. I guess being normal.
But yeah, you become a good point, because one common theme I'm hearing from the neurodiversity community is the managers. It's the managers that are sometimes a problem, quite frankly, because they are trained and so used to manage people who are neurotypical, who are normal or able to just do things a certain way. It's like ramming a round peg into a square hole. It doesn't work that way. But sometimes it's just simple as, to make things better, sometimes it's just simple as asking, what do you need to do the job? Because I have some friends that tackle this problem head on. They're more vocal. They would ask for things like this captions for meetings, or having a transcript of meeting notes. Small things like that make a huge difference and can help a neurodiverse person excel. Also, just having a good pair of headset, good headset.
Yeah,
block
definitely.
out all the noise.
Yeah, and I know one of the things, managing people is hard in general.
Yes.
So I think like trying to figure out what everyone's passions are, ways to overcome any challenges that they may have. That's always a challenge. When it comes to someone that do have these challenges, what's the best way to communicate with a manager your needs, your wants, in order to be as beneficial to the team as possible?
So that's a hard question, because it starts with the self, because a lot of people with neurodiverse conditions are just too afraid, because in the industry and globally, throughout our society, there is that negative stigma that if you are neurodiverse, you're going to look weird, you're going to act weird, and it's just perceived negatively by people in general and society. So to fix that, neurodiverse people, they have to start with themselves. Like, they have to feel comfortable to disclose that they are neurodiverse. Like, right, this month is a great month for celebrate LGBTQ and being gay. If you think about it, today, in these days, it's more socially acceptable to be LGBTQ compared to being neurodiverse. That speaks to the huge progress made on that front. But now we gotta bring up people who are neurodiverse. Like, we cannot, like, a lot of people who are neurodiverse, they're similar to how LGBTQ was back in the day. Neurodiverse people are literally like in the closet as well. They're hiding. They don't want to disclose because they're afraid of being discriminated or being treated differently. So companies need to do a better job to have the more empathy and just say, we will support you. We will give you what you need to thrive. Just being open about that and to reduce the barrier, I think that will go a long way, just being more open.
Absolutely. So I just want to share some of the comments that we have from our listeners. We have lots of folks coming in saying hi. And we have some regulars, and then we also have some new folks coming on. We have Simon. He mentioned staying hired is one of the challenges.
Yes, that is a challenge.
Fired several times, that he has Asperger's. We have other folks saying hi from around the world as well. Here's a great question, and I'll just put it up for a little bit, but then take it down because it's so big. But can you talk about the fine line of trying to encourage employee growth and placing a lot of attention and focus on the employee who might be neurodivergent and having communication issues, and prevent discrimination?
I think it comes down to, that's a really good question. Part of it comes down to the medium. Like, for example, for me, being in person in the office, I struggle. I struggle with social cues. I just struggle with like being in a meeting in person, but remote work now with the COVID and working remotely, I am a little bit more comfortable. And it just makes having conversations through like online meetings and IM and email, I'm much more comfortable there. So that's part one, just the medium. And number two, just having empathy. Like come down to, does the manager really want you to succeed? And do they really, like we're term, like sometimes you can feel it between just saying that they want to support you to actually doing it. As saying goes, actions speak louder than words.
And what are some of those, what are examples of great managers that you've seen that they've been able to empower you in the past? And that someone listening who is a manager can potentially use some of those tactics and techniques to help their workforce.
So part one, especially for me, is being open, just having open, honest conversation with your manager. And on the manager side, just having empathy. Sometimes, like in the tech and cyber world, it's notorious for having long hours and burnout. So as a result, like when having discussions, sometimes it's just a rush. Like we just want to get the meeting over with, just want to get to the next task. Sometimes you just got to slow down, just get into the zone, so to speak, just be focused on the conversation, like kind of like what we're having now, one-on-one. That alone helps compared to having a room full of people. Just focus and be empathetic. That's part one.
Yeah, I recently did at the employer that I work for, we had available a neurodiverse and inclusion training, and some of the things that were included in that were like be transparent, bring things up ahead of time, ask questions rather than state demands, involvement in the process rather than expecting them to take action, things like that.
Oh, and then another thing would be ask open-ended questions instead of yes or no questions. It's a huge difference.
Nice. So let's talk about another interesting topic that you've been also talking about is diversity as a whole. So it is LBGQ Awareness Month, but we've also talked about in the past trying to get diversity in general into cybersecurity. So when it comes to having a more diverse workforce within cybersecurity, what are some of the pros that you talk about to encourage diversity within cybersecurity?
Yep, no, this is something that is near and dear to my heart because, as everyone knows, like the tech world is a very specific, I say, demographic. I don't want to call out any specific races or anything, but everyone knows. But diversity is critically important because a lot of times people just want to go a certain route, and to break that group thing, that single train of thought, we need diversity. We got to have someone in the room who will say, "Great, it's great, we're going this way, but here's another idea." It's something I remember just growing up. I remember the Challenger shuttle explosion, like when I was in school, and when one reads the studies, one huge factor that led to that was groupthink, because everyone just assumed that nothing has ever happened to the space shuttle. So why would anything happen today? And as a result, all the issues that engineers saw were ignored. Like, can you imagine just having someone to say, "Wait, there's a problem, stop"? I think history would have been very different. Now in the cyber world, that is very much applicable even now. Like, because of the burnout, a lot of time people just want to get their job done, but without the diversity inclusion, sometimes people will miss things. People will miss the insider threat or hostile nation state actor trying to hack their way in. Sometimes it's very critical even today to have a person who can see that, who's a different mindset. Because even among, like, say, same gender, same race, same age, even if we're all same, the mindset of people can be different. Like, some people who are trans, they could see things very differently.
Hmm. Yeah, one of the topics we talked about on our CISO Thursday a couple of weeks ago was the Netflix documentary Coded Bias. And for me, what really struck is how bias has been encoded into technology,
Yes.
from algorithms to just the way that things are tackled. And people have accepted it for so long and not even considered the ramifications of this bias.
Yep, absolutely. It's not just that, but one area which people don't even think about is the leaders. Like, for example, like when people think of Walt Disney, they think of Disneyland, all these great, wonderful things he did. But when you look at his personal history, he was horribly racist. He didn't like women. He didn't like Jewish people. He didn't like blacks. Like, oh my God. But our history, we put a lot of leaders like that on a pedestal. Like, imagine if he was alive and well today, would people be willing to step up and tell him, we gotta hire, we need, we need more diversity and inclusion, we need more women? He would have said no. Can you imagine that today? But it's like it's like a little dirty little secret in IT and cyber. There are a lot of leaders who still think that like that, sadly. And I praise a lot of my fellow men and women in cyber who have the courage to speak up on social media to call out such individuals, because as long as they're there and keeping out women, keeping out other races, we're not going to have a diverse workforce globally unless things change.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I grew up in the Caribbean where I was a minority. So I got to see things culturally from a different perspective. But then I was also raised with cultural values that are significantly different than
Mm.
here in the United States. I've had the opportunity to travel to Europe, to live in Europe for a year, and being exposed to different cultures, you really see how individuals from different ethnic, socioeconomic, educational backgrounds, or even like family backgrounds that live in the same city can have such a totally different approach to the same problem set. And if you try to limit your workforce to everything being the same, you're not going to include that wide capability of problem solving in your workforce.
Absolutely. That's why having a diversity and inclusion, not just of people, but of thought, is so critical these days. And another area which is not often discussed is ageism, because I think the cutoff point is roughly like around 40. So when people get past 40, the ageism and discrimination at companies, it it's sad, but it does happen. People are just shut out. Like, they bring this tremendous wealth of experience, but a lot of companies, they just systematically shut out people like who are like past like 40, 45. It's like a huge wall.
The funny thing to that is I've seen statistics that show like those that are entrepreneurs, those that have been consistently working to build businesses, they tend to be more successful the older that they get because they've
Yes.
had that experience. They've seen all the possible ways that things can go wrong, and they
Yes.
take that and then they're finally able to implement it in an organization or a new startup that you're successful in. So having young blood all the time isn't always the best thing. Um,
Correct. It reminds me of the story of this engineer. Like, he worked on the engines for a U.S. Navy combat ship. So problem with the ship is the engines were just making this loud noise and just wasn't efficient. And they had these teams of engineers just trying to figure out what is wrong. They spent months or almost a year trying to figure it out. They bring in this elderly man, one of the chief engineers who designed it, who was like laid off years ago. They brought him in for like 1 hour, one bang of his hammer on the engine, everything was fixed. Just that one thing.
yeah,
It's
I mean,
hilarious.
yeah, I also get it often for those looking to break into cybersecurity, right? whether they're coming out of the military. By this point, they're 30, 40 years old, they're transitioning into the corporate workforce, and they're thinking that they have to start over. What they don't take into consideration is all those transferable skills, right?
Yes.
So let's talk about, from both a neurodiversity approach, what some of those other skills that we kind of touched on in the beginning that can be transferred in from the different fields that you said that individuals with neurodiverse backgrounds can have success in.
Yep, that's a great question. And I think in terms of transferable skills, it's not just on the job experience. That's a piece that a lot of people miss. It could be simple as like helping out your buddy, like this, do a project or volunteer work at a nonprofit. All of those are applicable experience that should be on your resume and that you can speak to in the interview. Or even I remember one cyber pro was talking about on a webinar where he just helped his dentist even just have a better incident response plan, just small thing like that. That's experience. And for transferable skills, it can go across the board. Even I remember one gentleman, he managed a Home Depot store that's applicable management experience that can be used in the cyber field. Like, you don't need to like be an expert hacker or to know everything A to Z. You just have to have applicable skills to do the job and be able to demonstrate it. Or number two, be able to learn it really quick.
Absolutely. You're getting some really nice feedback there, and you're awesome. That is from Benjamin McEwen.
Thank you.
And he says that you rock. Some of the things that I think about as you're talking is that individuals with neurodiversity always had to struggle with overcoming obstacles and finding ways about problems, and that lends to resiliency and troubleshooting skills that many overlook. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Because a lot of people who are neurodiverse, similar to me, we tend to be very technical, and it's not just tech either. I remember from one movie was called Midway, where they had code breakers, and some of them came from, like, say, a band. Like, who would have thought that a person who is in music could be good at cryptography, which is perhaps the historical basis for cybersecurity today? Which, that's an example right there. It's like, if you're good at music, you might have the mindset to be good at cybersecurity. Absolutely. Also, the technical piece is like one of my very, very, very first jobs in the technical field. When I was in IT, I was just a technician. I was really good at it too back in the day, which is another historical, entry-level job for many people who transition to cyber, just doing help desk or IT. The other piece, which is a huge barrier for many, was deciding which job in cyber is right for them. Because when people think of cybersecurity, the default mindset is hacker or pen testing, which is completely false. Mm-hmm. I actually posted about this on LinkedIn last year, where I stated that, and that had a very global, viral discussion where, I had around 500 hits, mm-hmm. 500 hits and comments, and roughly 30,000 reads from around the world, because people didn't think about that. You just naturally default to hacker. But in cybersecurity, there's just so many jobs. There's like SOC, there's privacy professionals, there's, in my view, personally, even a teacher. A teacher is also crucial for the cybersecurity pipeline. Teachers, incident responders, people who are just even give talks on security awareness training. They're all crucial.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. One of the comments from Benjamin mentioned that some disciplines like music trains the brain to be able to focus on complex things. And pen tester jobs only account for 7% of the cybersecurity work. Definitely agree there. And yes, music is also very technical.
Yes.
When it comes to some of the other roles that you think, we could just take your perspective, right? Because you can't speak for everyone. And I think often that's part of where this conversation goes wrong, is people think that one perspective is the only perspective. But for you, you mentioned that there's many other roles in cybersecurity. For you, which ones are the most interesting to you and why?
That's a good question. For me, I think I've done everything except I am. So for me, I didn't like being neurodiverse and struggling with social interactions. I didn't like being a manager too much. So that alone is a huge barrier for people who are neurodiverse, because quite frankly, for people who are neurodiverse like me, or even people who are not, some people quite frankly might not want to manage people. They could be just happier just focusing on a technical side. So the career paths in IT and cyber is still broken at many companies. Usually, like, you work from the ground up, from entry level to mid level, and then you advance to like manager and then executive positions. Like, I do not aspire to that at all, because I'm not comfortable being a manager. For me, I aspire to be for a more technical role, like a architect position, where I don't have to manage people as much. I can imagine many others would as well. So it all comes down to individual needs, and companies need to do a better job to adjust the career pathway to accommodate people who want a technical role, who do not want to be managing people. So that's another piece to it. And I like what you said earlier about the different cybersecurity roles, because one thing that came to mind is RPG game, like the old school Dungeons and Dragons. If people play such games, that can also help to identify, based on one's personality, what would be the best job for them. Like, if you're a healer, you'd might be better in a support role. Like, or do you want to be in the front line, or be in the front line, or even attack at range, so to speak. So RPG games that explore these different roles, or how you say, it just brings out your personality more when you play them, which might then in turn help you to identify the best cyber job for you.
Absolutely. And one of the comments back from Benjamin is that he prefers being a manager because he can call the shots. And like we said, everyone's different.
Yep.
I personally love leading people. I find that being able to inspire, grow, coach people, as much as I love the technical, I like to say I play between people, process, and technology, and become that translator. And being a people manager for me allows me to utilize the best resources from my team for the specific task. And then that way we could get the best outcome for the team as a whole. So question for you. I know we're about a half hour in. I've seen a lot of growth in the technical space into developing those tracks. You have the individual contributor tracks, which it sounds like you might be more towards, where you become a principal, then you become a staff, which is equivalent over to becoming a manager or a director in the other tracks. And maybe architect is like the final stage, so to speak. When it comes to looking for new roles, right? What are some of the challenges that you faced outside of the interview process? Do you feel that the way that roles are described makes it challenging for you to understand?
Oh, yes.
Or let's talk to that about.
Oh, yes. And that's a very important question too, because I think everyone knows the job description for cyber jobs. It's broken. It's really broken. But I remember even a entry-level job, I remember very clearly, an entry-level pen tester job, that one, and right on job description, it required OSCP, which is one of the top cybersecurity certifications to get, and it's one of those procedures and one of the hardest to get. I've even seen some organizations, they require, like, say, for entry level, like a GPen. For me, that speaks to discrimination, because a lot of people in certain demographics cannot afford a SAN certification or a course. But also, like to solve that, what I want to see, I would want to see is a standardized framework, which I believe this and some friends are working on, a standardized framework to standardize the job descriptions across the board so that it's more realistic. Like, you don't need 10 years experience to become an analyst for entry level, like, come on. Or I've even seen some job descriptions where for new futuristic technology that just came out in the past month, the job description requires 5 years experience in that new technology, which is ridiculous. No one's gonna have that.
Yeah, I remember seeing a meme about the creator of Kubernetes going,
Yes.
"Oh well, I guess I can't get a job working for this company because I only have 4 years of Kubernetes and they want 10."
Yes.
And oh well.
But on that point, when people see this high wall, all these requirements, they get discouraged. Most people will not even apply for those jobs. The way I got my very first cyber job, I ignored all that. I just apply for that job. Even if you can't do, like, say, 50% of the job, just apply for it, because you'd be surprised. Because a lot of hiring managers in HR, to be honest, look, a lot of people won't even know what a lot of those acronyms even mean, to be honest. The important thing is get in the door, get into the interview, and just show your enthusiasm, just because sometimes the other piece to it is luck.
Mm-hmm.
Luck. Sometimes you just gotta get lucky. Oh, I got that response from Simon. Passion.
Yep, yeah. And I
That's a good
recently
one
just
too.
shared an HBR article that said the exact same thing. And when it comes to the way that I've been coaching and mentoring people over the years, it takes that same track as well. I personally have never applied for a job where I meet 100% of the job description, because that tells me one thing. I'm going to go in and I'll be cruising in that job, and I never want to take a job where I'm going to be going in and cruising. Some people might want that, right? But for me, I'm looking at a role and I want to meet 50, 60% of the job description. That way I have 40 to 50% growth within that role. And I'm thinking like over the next 2 years, so that I see myself growing in the role rather than stagnating and staying the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I really remember there were studies done which looked at this along gender lines. I think roughly, like, for men, even if they could do only 25% of the job, they apply anyway and they still get a job. Whereas women, if they cannot even do 50% of the job, that alone discourages them. That's why I very much encourage everyone, just apply for the job. But even better, if you know anyone who can refer you, that's even better, because that cuts some of the red tape. Get the referral and get it.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that. Knowing people, networking.
Yes.
I'm guessing for me as an introvert, that's been challenging. I know I might not look like an introvert, but I'm sometimes very much introverted, and networking in person has always been a challenge. Online, I'm a little freer, been more comfortable with it. But what are some of the challenges when it comes to networking and meeting new people that individuals that are neurodivergent might have?
So ironically, with the COVID pandemic, and we're all working from home now, that has provided a huge opportunity for neurodiverse people like me, because I'm much more comfortable working at home. So that'd be my advice. That's one piece of advice I have right there. Like, you don't have to go to the conferences. You don't have to be in a place where you're not comfortable. Just stay in your comfort zone. Just take incremental steps. Like, just participate in an online community, or even a session like this, just small online meeting on Zoom or whatnot. Just
Mhm.
get out of your comfort zone in increments. Stay comfortable.
And when it comes to like the relationship building aspect, which is critical of networking, how do you how do you expose or discuss your concerns with your neurodiversity, because you don't want to be targeted, you don't want to be ridiculed. I know some people are fearful of that, and so what are some of the challenges when it comes to that? Because ideally, if you're always small, comfortable, you end up in the same group, right? So then you're not in a diverse group anymore. Everyone might be neurodiverse compared to the larger population, but then you group amongst yourselves and you become the same. So what techniques do you have for going outside of that comfort zone to really be effective in networking?
Great question. The way I went about that, I took kind of like almost like an inverse approach. So last year, I started a podcast called the Neurosick Podcast, where I interviewed many incredible people who are neurodiverse and work in cyber, and that it kind of helps me in a way, because by giving the opportunity for others to tell their stories, it kind of brought me out of the comfort zone a little bit, and it made me a little more open to talk about my own experiences. So that's how I address that. And number two, just another outlet is social media or writing articles. Like, we don't have to do it all in person. We can just find a outlet where we can express ourselves, either a podcast or writing articles or just posting on social media. That alone it can drive conversations.
Absolutely. And some of the tips that I give, whether it is getting hiring managers' attention or demonstrating subject matter expertise, is kind of like picking a subject area and doing a deep dive on it, doing a post or an article or a blog on it, and then sharing your approach, because that could highlight to a potential hiring manager that they might be the talent that you're looking for.
Absolutely. Another thing that came to mind is another huge barrier for breaking into cyber is experience. Like, when people see, oh, we need 5 to 10 years experience for this entry-level role. I talked about this earlier, but volunteer work is also, it counts. And I don't think people are saying that enough in the cyber world. Just like, for me personally, I do a lot of volunteer work. I'm currently on 3, I think 4 boards now. that counts. But even something as simple as going out into the community, because if you think about it, when the hostile nation states, when they want to attack, let's say, a government agency or military facility, they don't attack directly. They take their time to attack the more vulnerable places, like your mom and pop shops, your local grocery store, or your local dentist, or your local flower shop, because they will not have cybersecurity controls in place, or not as much. So by compromising them, and they can essentially create an army of zombie, or what's called a botnet. They can slave all of them together and launch a huge DDoS attack against government agencies. But when people think about it, those type of agencies, those mom and pop stores, your local neighborhood businesses, they are not getting the support they need in terms of like cybersecurity or even basic security best practices. So those are the areas which are a huge opportunity, which is often overlooked. So if you want more cybersecurity experience, just get together with your buddies, just help your local communities to do these things, just like security awareness training, or helping them to understand best practices, such as having antivirus and patching. Small volunteer projects like that counts as cybersecurity experience.
Absolutely, and that really ties into there's been a change in the U.S. policy to ransomware, and that came with an executive memo. And in that executive memo that was recently released, talked to some basic cyber practices. And in some Slack channels that I've been in, people are like, well, we've been talking about these basic practices for years. I'm like, well, there's a reason that you're still highlighting it, is that people are still struggling with them, right? It's not revolutionary here, but it provides simple guidance for the mom and pop stores. And even that same guidance escalated to a medium-sized or enterprise company. If they can't follow that simple guidance, there's bigger trouble ahead. So use that same experience. What are some of the other ways that you found to gain experience that was helpful for you in your career?
For me, it's mostly volunteer, but also, like, for example, when I reviewed my current position, they really enjoyed that. they enjoyed all my D&I work, all the things I'm doing, like supporting neurodiversity, women, cyber. That was a huge, we call it, that's a big way how I differentiate myself from the pack.
Mhm.
A lot of people, they don't do as much. They just want to just work. But that goes to show that some companies, they care not just what you do in your current job, but they also care about volunteer work and what you do outside of work. It really does make a huge difference. And I think to your other point about discussing about helping companies, like the best practice, like best practices are out there, but I think one huge reason why a lot of companies are not following it is legacy. Legacy systems are just out there, and just like that's where the term that's often used from this one show, Big Bertha's. It's kind of like a dark secret that people hide in their closets, but it's such systems are just so critical to the functionality of a company that they don't want to touch it, they don't want to upgrade it, they don't want to break it, so they just ignore it, and it's a huge like vulnerability right there.
Hashtag mainframe.
One crazy thought I had out of history is something, if people remember back in the day, the Marshall Plan. Like after World War II, the countries of Europe particularly were devastated. They were all like in ruins, and the U.S. led the way, the Marshall Plan, and loaning out money to these countries to help them to rebuild. I think that one thing that would help is something similar. If we had something similar to the Marshall Plan, so that loans could be provided to companies to replace these legacy systems, get rid of these old vulnerabilities, I think you'll see a lot of, we call it a lot of their security postures will improve dramatically. But alas, the money is a huge factor. So by providing it something similar to the Marshall Plan through like low interest rate loans, just having something like that in place, I think that will help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's the risk conversation that us
Yes.
cybersecurity professionals need to have. Every day that you have a system that you don't patch it, it increases your technical debt. And there's two ways to pay for technical debt.
Yes.
There's a business outage, and there is doing it slowly and surely and doing it yourself. But Nathan, I really wanted to thank you. It was a great conversation. We've had lots of interaction from the audience. Thank you so much for coming on. And is there anything else that you wanted to share with the audience that you might do for the community that you wanted to bring up?
Absolutely. My friend Carmen Marsh, she's hosting the Cybersecurity Women of the Year Awards in Las Vegas on August the 3rd. It's a great opportunity for people to, especially women, to network and meet amazing, incredible leaders and executives and professionals in cybersecurity. Because like you said, Chris, networking is just so crucial to getting that job. So it's so you can go to the event and you can watch to see who's going to win, which amazing women are going to win the awards. So it's a great opportunity. So that's August 3rd in Las Vegas.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much. And I know that you don't want to say this, but you've been a big promoter of bringing everyone into the community as possible. You mentioned that Microsoft has been a huge supporter of yourself, so I'll give them a shout out for being so welcoming to the neurodiverse community. And thank you everyone for coming today, and hope you all have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Bye.